I placed the envelope on the kitchen table and sat down quietly. I didn't say a word. I simply folded my hands and waited. My name is Graham Whitfield. I am 63 years old. I spent 34 years working as a shift supervisor at a timber processing plant just outside Rotorua, waking before dawn every single morning, coming home smelling of sawdust and machine oil, eating whatever was left in the pot, and falling asleep before 9. That was my life. That was the life I chose. And I chose it without complaint, because I believed I was building something. A home, a future, a family. What I didn't realize, until the morning I sat at that kitchen table with that envelope in front of me, was that I had been building it entirely alone. My wife's name is Cheryl. We had been married for 11 years. I met her at a community fundraiser in town, a Saturday afternoon event where she was helping run the cake stall. She was warm, she was funny, she talked to everyone like they were already her friend. Her daughter, Tanya, was 15 at the time, a quiet girl who mostly kept to herself. Cheryl told me on our second date that Tanya's father had left when Tanya was 8 and had never looked back. I told her that didn't matter. I told her I was here now. I meant that. I want to be clear about that. I meant every word. Tanya was 26 when everything came apart. She had been living with us for the past 4 years, ever since she moved back home after finishing a hospitality course in Tauranga. She said she needed time to get back on her feet. She said the rental market was brutal. Both of those things were true. So I said, of course, stay as long as you need. That was 4 years ago. In that time, Tanya had worked a handful of short-term jobs, none lasting more than a few months, and her boyfriend Darren had been spending more nights at our place than at his own flat. I had raised this with Cheryl more than once. The conversations never went anywhere. What I want to tell you first, before I get to the envelope and the morning everything changed, is how the money worked in our household. Or more accurately, how it stopped working. When Cheryl and I married, we set up a joint account for household expenses. I deposited my full fortnightly pay into that account. Cheryl worked part-time at a pharmacy in town, 3 days a week, and her income went in as well. At the time, her wage was modest but consistent, and together we were comfortable. We weren't wealthy by any measure, but we owned our home outright. I had paid off the mortgage 2 years before we met, and we had no significant debt. Life was manageable. About 2.5 years ago, Cheryl reduced her hours at the pharmacy. I didn't question it. She said her knees were giving her trouble, and standing for long shifts was becoming difficult. I said, fine, your health comes first. Her income dropped by roughly 1/3. I didn't adjust my own contributions. I simply absorbed the difference and said nothing. Then, about 18 months ago, I noticed the account balance was consistently lower than it should have been. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly, steadily lower. I would deposit my pay, and within a week, the account would be nearly empty. Our household costs had not changed. I wasn't spending more. But the money was disappearing. I mentioned it to Cheryl twice. The first time she said she had been stocking up the pantry and had paid a larger power bill. The second time she said she thought there had been some automatic charges she hadn't realized were active. Both times she seemed slightly irritated that I had brought it up, as if asking about our shared finances was an intrusion. I backed off both times. I wish now that I hadn't. What I did instead, quietly and without telling anyone, was start keeping records. I am not a naturally suspicious man. I want you to understand that. I spent 34 years trusting the people I worked alongside, and not once did that trust cost me. But something in my gut had begun to turn, the way it does when you know something is wrong but haven't yet found the words for it. So I started paying attention. I downloaded the bank app. I checked it every night before bed. I began writing down every transaction I couldn't account for in a small notebook I kept in the drawer of my workbench in the garage. Over the following 4 months, I documented 41 transactions I had not authorized and could not explain. Fuel purchases at a service station on the other side of town. Clothing purchases at shops I had never been to. Restaurant charges on Tuesday afternoons when I was at work and Cheryl had told me she was resting at home. Grocery runs that were far larger than 2 people, and occasionally, a house guest could justify. The total came to just over $19,000. $19,000 from our shared account. In 4 months, I sat with that number for a long time. I sat with it in the garage on cold evenings after dinner while Cheryl and Tanya watched television inside. I turned it over in my mind like a stone, examining every side of it. I thought about whether I had made an error. I checked the notebook against the bank statements 3 times. I had not made an error. I want to tell you about the afternoon I went to the bank. I went on a Thursday, during my lunch break, while Cheryl thought I was eating at the site canteen. I asked to speak with someone privately. A young woman named Priya sat down with me in a small office and pulled up our account history on her screen. I told her I wanted to understand the spending patterns over the last 12 months. She was professional and thorough, and by the time we were done, the picture was even worse than my notebook had suggested. In 12 months, there had been 83 transactions I could not account for. The total was just under $41,000. Priya asked me if I would like to speak with the fraud team. I told her I needed a few days first. She gave me her card and told me to call whenever I was ready. I drove back to work and sat in my car in the car park for 20 minutes. $41,000. More than a year's worth of putting money aside for the new roof we had been talking about. More than the trip to Scotland I had promised Cheryl for our 10th anniversary and kept postponing because we never seemed to have quite enough saved. $41,000. And somehow we never seemed to have quite enough saved. And now I understood exactly why. That evening I went home and I watched Cheryl and Tanya moving around the kitchen together, laughing at something on Tanya's phone. Darren was sitting at our dining table eating the meal I had funded, scrolling through his own screen. Nobody looked up when I came in. I made myself a cup of tea, took it to the back veranda, and sat there in the dark for an hour. I did not confront anyone that night. I had learned enough over 63 years to know that confronting people before you are fully ready gives them the opportunity to build a story. I was not going to give anyone that opportunity. Instead, I did something I had been thinking about for 2 weeks. The following morning, I went into the bank branch before work and opened a new personal account in my name only. I arranged to have my fortnightly pay deposited there going forward. I changed the direct debit for my personal phone plan to the new account. I moved my 3-month emergency fund across. I left enough in the joint account to cover the upcoming power and rates bills because despite everything, I was not going to let those lapse, and nothing more. I did not tell Cheryl. I drove to work and I did my job. I came home. I ate dinner. I watched the news. I went to bed. I said goodnight the same way I always did. 4 days later, on a Tuesday morning, I was on my second cup of tea at the kitchen table when I heard Cheryl's voice from the hallway. She sounded sharp, urgent, the way she sounded when something had gone wrong. Then Tanya's voice, higher pitched, the two of them talking fast. Then footsteps. They both walked into the kitchen at the same time. Cheryl was holding her phone. Tanya was holding hers. They were looking at me the way you look at someone who has just done something unforgivable. "What's happened to the account?" Cheryl said. I took a sip of my tea. "Which account?" I said. "Our account. The joint account. I tried to use my card this morning and it declined." "A $47 purchase at the supermarket, Graham. $47. I looked at her. I looked at Tanya. I set my cup down. "The joint account has enough to cover the power bill and the rates," I said. both of which are due this week. I'd rather not touch that. Cheryl's face went very still. What are you talking about? Where has the money gone? You got paid last Thursday. I did, I said. Then where is it? I reached across the table and pulled the envelope toward me. I had printed everything the night before, sat at my workbench in the garage with the portable printer and the bank statements and my notebook, and put it all together carefully, the way I used to prepare for performance reviews at work. I opened the envelope and laid the pages out on the table, one by one, facing them so Cheryl could read them right side up. $41,230, I said. That's what I've been able to account for over the last 12 months. From our joint account, these are the transactions. Cheryl stared at the pages. Tanya took a step backward. I haven't touched that money, Cheryl said. Those are household expenses. Fuel purchases in Papamoa on days I was at work, I said. Lunch at a restaurant in the city on a Wednesday, twice in March. Clothing at 3 different stores. And here I pointed to a highlighted row $280 at a hardware shop I have never visited. Do you want to explain the hardware shop? Cheryl looked up from the pages. Her jaw was tight. I don't have to explain every purchase to you. We have a joint account. We both use it. You both use it, I said. And I looked at Tanya when I said it. Tanya opened her mouth. She closed it again. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of. Cheryl started. I haven't accused you of anything, I said. I've shown you a printed summary. That's a different thing. There was a silence. Outside, a car went past. The fridge hummed. Where is your pay going now? Cheryl said. To an account in my name. Her face changed. Something moved behind her eyes, not just anger. Something closer to alarm. It was the same thing I had seen in Priya's expression at the bank when the full picture came up on her screen. The alarm of someone realizing that the situation has already moved beyond them. You can't just do that, Cheryl said. We're married. We have a household to run. We do, I said. I've left enough in the joint account to run it through this billing cycle. After that, I'll be paying the household bills directly from my account. The mortgage is gone. So the actual costs are manageable. What about everything else? Groceries? Petrol? I'll cover the groceries, I said. A reasonable amount for 2 people living here. I'll be doing the shopping myself. There was another silence. Tanya was still standing near the doorway. She looked younger than 26 in that moment. She looked like she had when I first met her, at 15. Quiet and uncertain. This is because of me, Tanya said. I looked at her. It's because of what's happened to the account, I said. I don't want to assign blame this morning. I want to be clear about where things stand going forward. Cheryl's voice went flat. Going forward. What does that mean? 5. It means I think we all need to be honest with ourselves about what this household looks like, I said. You've reduced your work hours. Tanya has been here 4 years without a stable income. Darren is here most nights. The account has been significantly overused. None of that can continue the way it has been. So, what are you saying? Cheryl said. Are you asking us to leave? I had thought about how to answer this question for 2 weeks. I had rehearsed it on the back veranda in the dark. I had written it in my notebook and crossed it out and written it again. I'm saying that if things continue as they are, the answer will eventually be yes, I said. I'd like to avoid that. But that depends on what happens next. Cheryl stood up. She gathered the printed pages from the table, my pages, my records, and I let her take them, because I had 3 more copies. She walked out of the kitchen without another word. Tanya followed her. I heard their voices in the hallway, low and urgent. Then the sound of a door closing. I finished my tea. I called in to work that morning and took the day as annual leave. I rang my brother Colin, who is 71 and has lived alone since his own divorce 12 years ago, and I told him what had happened. Colin listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always valued about him. When I finished, he said, "You've done the right thing, Graham. You should have done it 6 months ago, but you've done it now." Then he said, "Ring a lawyer today. Don't wait." I rang a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Sandra, and she had an office on the main street. And she had been recommended to me by a colleague at work who had used her during a property dispute. I told her everything. She listened, asked several precise questions about the transactions, asked about the nature of the joint account, and asked whether I had copies of all the bank records. I told her I had 3. Sandra explained what my options were in plain language, which I appreciated. She told me that the money spent from a joint account by a spouse is legally complex, but that documentation of a pattern of spending that was not agreed upon by both parties was significant. She told me to change the locks on the house, which I had not yet done, and to notify the bank formally that I was the sole ongoing depositor to the joint account. She also told me that if I had any intention of separating, I should begin that process sooner rather than later, because the longer I delayed, the more complicated the financial picture would become. I drove home from Sandra's office with a great deal to think about. The light was going off the harbor by the time I got back. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, looking at the house. This house I had owned for 22 years, that I had paid off on my own before I had ever met Cheryl, that had a kauai tree in the front garden. I had planted the year after my mother died because she had loved them. I had built this. Every bit of it. I went inside and I made dinner. Cheryl ate in silence. Tanya didn't come out of her room. Darren, for the first time in several months, was not there. Over the following week, things were very quiet. Cheryl and I moved around each other carefully, politely, the way you move around someone in a room that has become unfamiliar. She did not apologize. She did not offer an explanation for the transactions. She did not ask again where my pay was going. I took that silence as its own kind of answer. I changed the locks on a Friday afternoon. While Cheryl was at her sister's in Hamilton, a locksmith named Ross came and did the work in under an hour and handed me 4 new keys. I kept 2 and locked the others in my workbench drawer. I left a note on the kitchen bench telling Cheryl that the locks had been changed for security reasons and that her new key was on the hallway table. She came home at 7 that evening. She picked up the key without comment. What happened the following Tuesday I hadn't expected, though perhaps I should have. I was in the garden in the late afternoon, pulling weeds along the back fence, when I heard a car pull into the driveway, then voices, then footsteps on the side path. Cheryl came around the corner of the house with a man I recognized as her brother, Wayne. Wayne was 4 years younger than Cheryl, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who took up a lot of space in a room and knew it. He had never much liked me. The feeling was mutual. Behind Wayne was Darren. "We want to talk," Cheryl said. I straightened up and took off my gardening gloves. "All right," I said. Wayne started first. He used the word unreasonable 6 times in the first 2 minutes. He said that what I had done to the account was a form of financial control. He said that Cheryl had rights as a spouse. He said that Tanya was practically my daughter and I had a responsibility to the household. I let him finish. Then I said, "Wayne, I have documentation of $41,000 in unaccountable transactions from our joint account over the past 12 months. I have spoken to a lawyer. I have reported the pattern to the bank. If you'd like to continue this conversation, I'd suggest doing it through solicitors." Wayne looked at Cheryl. Cheryl looked at the ground. Darren said nothing. He had not said anything yet. 41,000? Wayne said. 41,230, I said. That's what I've documented. There may be more. I haven't yet traced. Another silence. The kauai tree moved slightly in the wind. That's not possible, Wayne said. but his voice had changed. The certainty had gone out of it. "The bank records are available," I said. "Sandra Holloway on Devonport Road has copies. I suggest you speak to your own solicitor." Wayne looked at Cheryl again, longer this time. Something passed between them that I couldn't read. Then he turned and walked back down the side path. Darren followed him without making eye contact. Cheryl stood for a moment looking at me. Then she said quietly, "I didn't think it had gotten that high." It was the closest she ever came to an admission. "I know," I said. And I meant it gently, though there was nothing gentle about the situation. She went inside. I went back to my weeding. I want to tell you what happened in the months after that, because I think it matters, and I think it is the part that people don't always talk about. Tanya left first. She found a flat share with 2 other women in a suburb closer to town, and moved out 3 weeks after the Tuesday in the garden. She came to me the morning she left, while Cheryl was still in bed, and she stood in the kitchen with her car keys in her hand and said, "I'm sorry, Graham. I know I made things harder than they needed to be." I told her I appreciated her saying that. I told her I hoped she found her footing, and I meant it. And percenting, and I meant it. And I meant it. Whatever had happened with the account, Tanya was not the architect of it. She was a young woman who had been allowed to lean too heavily for too long. And that was a failure of the adults in the house, not just hers. Cheryl and I separated formally 6 weeks later. Sandra guided the process. It was not without difficulty. There were conversations about the house, about assets, about the documented transactions. Cheryl had a solicitor of her own, a quiet man named Brian who did not seem particularly enthusiastic about her case. In the end, an agreement was reached that I will not go into detail about here, except to say that Sandra told me afterward that having the records had made a significant difference. I still live in the house. The kowai tree is flowering this week, bright yellow along the fence. I have been sleeping better than I have in 2 years. I am not angry. I want to say that clearly, because I think there is a temptation, when you hear a story like this, to want the person at the center of it to be furious. And I was, for a while. I was furious in the way that you are furious when you realize you have been quietly, consistently deceived by someone you trusted completely. But fury is expensive. It costs you sleep and health and clear thinking. I spent enough of my own money without spending my peace of mind on top of it. What I feel now is more like clarity. I think about the years I spent in that plant, before dawn, smelling of sawdust, trusting that the life I was building meant something to the people I was building it for. I think about the trips we never took, and the roof we never replaced, and the savings account that never seemed to grow. I think about what it means to give someone access to the thing you have worked hardest for, not just money, but trust, and what it means when that access is misused. If I could go back and tell the Graham of 3 years ago one thing, it would be this. Pay attention early. Not with suspicion, not with paranoia, but with the same care you give to everything else you have spent a lifetime building. A household is a partnership. A partnership requires honesty from everyone inside it. The moment that honesty disappears, the moment explanations become defensive, the moment questions feel like intrusions, that is the moment to pay close attention. Keep records. Not because you expect the worst, but because records are simply the truth written down. The truth should never be something to be afraid of. Know your accounts. Know what goes in and what comes out. Not as a means of control, but as a means of knowing. There is a difference, and it is an important one. Get advice early. A lawyer, a financial counselor, a trusted person with clear eyes. I waited longer than I should have, and that delay was costly in ways I am still calculating. There is no virtue in handling everything alone. And finally, this is the one I return to most often. Do not confuse generosity with surrender. I was generous with Cheryl. I was generous with Tanya. I am proud of that. Generosity is not the problem. The problem is what happens when generosity is treated not as a gift, but as an entitlement. When the giving is taken for granted so completely that the person giving it becomes invisible. You can be generous and still have limits. You can be kind and still protect yourself. Those two things are not in conflict. I am 63 years old. I have my house and my garden and the kowai tree my mother would have loved. I have my brother Colin, who answers the phone. I have Sandra's number in my phone in case I need her. I have 3 copies of every document. I do not have $41,000, but I have something I hadn't realized I'd lost until I got it back. I have peace of mind. And before you go, if this story made you think of someone you know or something in your own life, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. How did you come across Silver Stories today? Was it through a friend? Through YouTube's suggestions? Or have you been with us from the beginning? And if you've ever had to make a hard decision to protect yourself, what gave you the courage to do it? Tell me below. Your stories matter.